You are listening to the Namibian's audio recording.
Yeah, I think maybe to add to that. So I think that one of the things that needs to be well understood is the fact that private sector and government don't work the same. We talk about public sector and private sector as if they're, two sides of the same coin. They're not. And I think that that's extremely important. Private sector is not an organization with a leader that dictates down to private sector what they will be doing. Private sector responds to incentives and disincentives, and it's lots of individuals and lots of individual entities doing that collectively. Government is totally different. There you do have a leader who says, what we are going to do now as government is X, Y, and Z, or a series of leaders that communicate and then say that that's what we're going to be doing. So to think that one can dictate to and instruct private sector to behave in a certain way, as if it's the other side of the government or the public sector coin, I think is the first kind of critical mistake. And we need to understand that if you want to get private sector to do certain things that you think are important for society and so on, you need to create the right incentives and disincentives for that. And that's sort of issue number one. Issue number two is that as much as people may view it as something that's evil or similar, profit is very, very, very fundamental to private sector. I mean, I don't need to say that to this room. But there's a perception that profit is bad. Now, certain types of profit obviously are bad. If you make your profit while destroying, the environment, while exploiting labor, etc., then your profit may be one of the bad forms of profit. But profit in and of itself is very fundamental to an economy. And that pursuit of profit can have huge socioeconomic benefits. But it doesn't, and markets are not perfect solutions to all these socioeconomic problems. But they can contribute to those socioeconomic solutions. But they're not going to catch everything. Private sector can play a huge role in that space, and we can see exactly what happens when private sector starts withdrawing in terms of from the economy in terms of socioeconomic development. All those households that used to have incomes that no longer do because well-meaning people are putting together pathetic NEF scorecards. These sorts of things cause this withdrawal and cause socioeconomic harm, not good. So the right private sector environment where there's an adequate degree of regulation to ensure that people are not making unethical, immoral, unreasonable profit, that's fine. But where you start trying to take political objectives and impose them on private sector as if it's an organization that can dictate from the top down that this is what we'll be doing, that's where things start to fall apart. And that's exactly what we've seen over the last few years. Inequality is something that we as a society should be concerned about. But no micro-enterprise is concerned about inequality per se. The same with regards to poverty, the same with regards to all these other things. This is not a micro-level problem that can be solved at micro-level. This is a macro-level problem, and this is where we need to create the right incentives and disincentives to say, how do we solve these sorts of problems in long-term sustainable manners? And in reality, for both of those problems, it's via employment. And employment only happens if companies can be profitable, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, this stuff is all obviously deeply interlinked. Take it one step further, though, and say, well, okay, if we are taking these political objectives and imposing them onto private sector and say private sector is not doing enough, when private sector is actually doing a huge amount to contribute to socioeconomic development through employment, through, while pursuing profit, because if you don't make profit, you close your doors and send everyone home and you have socioeconomic regression. But if private sector is now required to do those things, for what are all these taxes being paid? We pay these for a number of different things. One of them is for public goods that we all make use of. But another one of them, specifically in a country like our own, is to ensure that those people that have been left behind in the past don't remain left behind in the future. That portion of the equation is not working. And I think that one of the things that you see is increasing reluctance to pay more tax, to do more socioeconomic good, CSR work, these sorts of things. Because it's more difficult to make profit, because you feel like private sector is blamed for a lot of the problems, but actually is contributing enormously to the pie, a third of all your profits before tax going to government. And that portion of the equation isn't working well. So I mentioned government spending 68 billion this year. How much of that is ensuring that little kids grow up in houses with running water and access to electricity? Very little. How much of it is ensuring that kids have really world-class education and that they don't remain left behind a generation, as another generation left behind? How much of it is going to building new hospitals and ensuring that we have good access to healthcare for the population as a whole? And on all of these very fundamental things to ensure that we see long-term reductions in inequality, long-term improvements with regards to socioeconomic development across the board, the shortcoming is not on private sector side. And I think that this is something that we have to be honest about. You can't go and level all of these responsibilities that are political objectives that don't fit at micro-enterprise size or at individual enterprise size onto private sector as if it is this homogeneous body with a leader at the top. It just doesn't work. And until we see a change with regards to that attitude towards private sector from public sector and an improvement in capital allocation from public sector, I don't think that these problems are going to disappear.